Go ahead, Brendan, let's hit the next slide. And I think we'll go ahead and start. Not on purpose. There you go. Just took a few seconds. Okay. So, quite a few logistics. Sorry, I need to hide something here. I'm not controlling that. We have pointers to all the notes and things. They're on screen. It all starts with bit.ly/core24, and then it uses notes or slides or Slido, or the application, of course, is core.esipfed.org. If you want to go to the application now, you can feel free to do that. Session notes have been put into the chat. Thank you very much to our helpful assistant. We'll have three of us presenting. Ruth Doerr is online, and we'll be talking in places about the context around COR and thoughts about how we can go forward. Brandon is doing a lot of the demonstration and code, and I'll be presenting most of the slides for convenience. We're going to give you a little introduction first, then we're going to do a hands-on tutorial. You can log in and try stuff yourself. We know this is not a great application all running perfectly. We're not going to be concerned if you criticize any aspect of it. All input and comments are welcome. Then we're aiming for some discussion at the end in terms of where you would like to see this application go, or if you would like to see this application go. You can interrupt any time with questions, especially if it's context specific. We'll have one or two pauses built in where you can have a chance to ask specific questions. And you can also put your questions in the chat and in the notes. Next slide. So we're going to start with a poll. And the only problem is I don't think I've managed to figure out how to activate this poll. Let me see if this does it. Go to the next slide, Brendan. Can't do it. So I'll have to try to do that on mine. I can do it. Yeah. And you can read the potential answers now while you're thinking about it, what the reasons are that you would like to be doing the COR training. And I'm not sure. Thank you. I will say something about those poetry kits that helps cover another aspect of this. There will be one set of the terms that will mention the Marine Metadata Interoperability Repository, which is what brought a lot of this about. And we are presenting that work as part of ESIP. I still do a little bit on the Marine Metadata Interoperability Repository. I can't really figure out how to start the slide over while I'm sitting and talking, so we may have to come back to that. Yeah, sorry. Skip that. So what we want to talk about today is vocabularies for all, and making it possible for everybody to get access to the vocabularies that we want to see put into COR. We have a real and improvable piece of software here, and we want that to be improved if that's the right answer. And we want to help ESIP lead in this process of creating ontology repositories for all of earth science and space science. Next. Now, you're here, I expect, because you've experienced science communications in action, and you're aware that it's not like we're all able to talk with one voice to each other as we're annotating our data and talking about our data and talking about our science. And it's really, as it has always been, a bit of a Tower of Babel in terms of different scientists and communities talking to each other and having their own languages of necessity to talk about. So the thinking of these repositories is that if only there were a place to store and find and use our science vocabularies from these different communities, then we would really be in much better shape because we could start seeing what everybody else is using. Next. And so this is where COR comes in, and we're going to talk first about the history of it and then about the actual how it works and how you can use it. Looks something like this. This is actually a slide from the Marine Metadata Interoperability Ontology Registry and Repository, which runs the same software. And this is what it looks like currently, but 17 years ago, it looked a lot simpler than this. Next slide. So that software existed for quite a while for the Marine community and was used by that community. And ESIP was testing out some another type of software called Bioportal to do the same kind of thing. But it had a hard time being maintained and kept up. So the COR system was also evaluated. And there was a fairly significant sort of independent evaluation of the two systems and determination of which ones should be used for ESIP. Next. And the result of that was to choose the MMI software as the basis, and we installed a new version of it for ESIP and got it up and running on ESIP platforms. One of the main reasons I think for that was that it gave ESIP members the ability to control the software and the contents. That is to say, ESIP really could fully own it. And this was about 8 years ago, and we had some understandings to the effect of we could help make sure that kept going and was kept as a persistent repository. Next slide. So we've had this repository, the Community Ontology Repository, or COR, for going on 8 years now. Next. And the MMI one has actually been going on for 19 years. This one has about, the COR has a little over 300 vocabularies in it right now. MMI has 299. So it's fallen behind just a little bit. We're thinking about moving the MMI vocabularies into the COR and shutting down the MMI repository and forwarding all of those references to COR, which can be done. Next. So these are not just current repositories that can be used for, I mean, they're current repositories, but they're not just current vocabularies that can be used for things that are active vocabularies in use on various systems. They also have a certain amount of the history of vocabularies that have been used over the years. And that represents a body of knowledge that is quite handy for people who are building their own ontologies and or wanting to know what things might have meant back in the day. Thanks. So in a way, this is ESIP's baby, very cute baby, in my opinion. I guess I was there for its birth in some sense, so I would say that. But we want to try and take that and run with it and see where we can go with it. Next. Now, Ruth Dewar is on the line, and I've asked her to say a few words about the reasons that she has found COR useful, and many other scientists as well. Ruth?
Sure. So the point is that I've been using COR since it existed. In other words, if I'm creating some sort of earth science thing, an ontology, vocabulary, whatever, I put it in COR because it's really the only earth science place I know of that'll take it and make it useful. And I'm hoping it'll stick around. And the key there was making my ontologies useful. Sure, I can put them out on GitHub and get an overall DOI from Zenodo, but that doesn't make each term, its URI, directly accessible or even discoverable. Heck, the only way you would know that ontology and any of its term exists is if you knew that I had created it and that you knew my GitHub username or maybe the name of the project I was working on when I created it. In other words, just putting it out on GitHub doesn't actually share it really. And the problem with COR in my book at the moment is that it isn't supported really with any funding through ESIP much. And so I am a little bit worried that it's not going to stick around. But if I have to show relationships between words, vocabularies that are my sources, all these things, I can do that with COR. And there aren't And you certainly can't do that with GitHub, for example. For example, relationships between words like what terms are inputs and outputs to a process, like sunlight is an input to photosynthesis, the main output being sugar, and a waste product being the oxygen we breathe. And more than that, unlike many ontology creators, I do know how to and usually do use a lot of terms from other ontologies, typically those from the W3C or the Obo Foundry, or even COR. But what that means is that I occasionally need to be able to look up what ontology terms are used where, if some ontologies had an update. Or maybe I need to write a paper about my ontology and I need to discuss its foundations. I need to know what all those sources were, and COR is an easy way to find that list. And there are many reasons why folks need to know what vocabulary terms have been reused. I mean, that's one of the Obo Foundry facilities that I really like. You can examine an ontology term and see a list of all the other ontologies that use it. And I wish COR had that form of two-way discovery a little bit more easily. But I can even query COR for things like I just want to know what ontologies were created by Simon Cox, or I only want to look at ontologies that are known to be stable. Then there's all these search capabilities that GitHub certainly doesn't have, but COR does. And on the next slide, I can show you, documenting things is hard, but COR starts to make it. Oh, somebody's lost a slide.
Sorry, so it appears.
Okay, there's an example that I wish you'd been able to see. I mean, there's a button in COR you push, and it gives you a pretty nice document about what your ontology or vocabulary that you'd put into COR looks like. It was beautiful, and I wish that slide still existed.
Sorry, I moved that slide. It comes up later, Ruth. We'll show it to people. I didn't.
Okay, fine.
Sorry.
All right.
So embarrassed. Thank you very much for that. Were you done?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So that's the vision behind COR. And we're going to move along now and talk about an actual demonstration of that this is a real thing and that ideally people from ESIP can modify to the extent they want and make it do what they want. So I'll be showing you a lot of these operations first via slideware. Brandon's going to demonstrate them in the COR system. My version will be kind of quick. Brandon's maybe too, but you'll have seen it twice in many cases. And if you have questions, you can ask them in chat. Ruth will be monitoring that and trying to answer things as we go along. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll have a few pauses. So if you want to get on COR, you have your laptop open and a browser open. You go to one of the two sites at the upper right, core.esip.org, or you can add the /ont so you don't have to click an extra button. And that brings up your display screen. And from there, you can either sign in or create an account if you don't have one already. It's pretty straightforward. And once you've signed in, you can tell that because at the upper right, the name has changed from sign in, create account to your name. And the profile information is selected from there. So when you want to actually add an ontology or build a vocabulary, you're here in the overall view of things, the top part of which has a number of different fields. Next slide. And the create vocabulary slide is the one we use. This is going to be for a quick demonstration of the fact you can create a vocabulary inside the system. Usually you'll be creating your vocabulary with another tool, but this is a way forward if you just want to play around and have something to work with. Next. So the screen that comes up lets you enter your name or is pre-entered to your name. And there's one important choice here, whether you want your ontology to be using an IRI that you're adding or an IRI that COR knows about. In this case, I've said, it says ORR based, that's the software underlying COR. I've chosen that. I've said I want the short name of the ontology to be COR 2024 meeting. And I have an IRI that is drawn out from that because the core software has created the rest of the IRI for this ontology. And I've made it public so that you all can see it. And in fact, you can go see it at this point on the repository, and it's draft because it's draft. Next slide. And that shows all of that in much more detail. So we can go to the next slide. And you will see register appears immediately. It's a little early to actually click on the register button because if you did, you wouldn't have any real content in your slide. You want to fill out some of the metadata first. I just did a few examples here. I'd like you to do all of them all the time. And then the data can be entered in the bottom section. Let's see what the next slide is. You can see how the ontology name has been constructed and how it will be registered. This is starting to show the metadata fields, and you can actually get info about those fields by rolling over the OMB part or rolling over the field name. There's 4 different kinds of tabs for metadata. I think you'll tab through those if you go to those next. And keep going, slow roll. The usage and license permissions are about how the ontology can be licensed, whether it's okay for somebody else to use it, who you are if they need to contact you as the author. The next one shows the original source information. If this comes from another ontology that you're putting into COR, you can document that in detail. And then the final item, which isn't shown, is the other information that actually can be parsed directly from the ontology itself. Next. So the metadata details all come up at the top. And then that can be folded up if you want, but the bottom part is where we add our data. And if we click on the term set, we're adding essentially these vocabulary terms, one collection at a time. So next slide. This brings up something that prompts you for the class of or the name of your term set. In this case, I gave it the local name moods. I could have selected a full IRI for this class, so a full long name that wasn't in core.esipfed.org. That's an unusual case. Usually you're going to create your local name inside of this, and you can see the IRI that comes out at the bottom. It has moods at the end. Next slide. Now I'm finally getting the chance to start entering names if I want, but I don't want to just enter names. I want to enter definitions also, let's say. So in that case, I click on the property field and the property tab there. And that brings up the term set property, fill in the blank here. Again, I have the chance to fill in a local name. I could call this a definition property, but that actually isn't very helpful to people because it's my definition property. Nobody knows what I mean by that. Here, I really do want to use a full IRI that is a common definition. And that full IRI is selectable once I click on full IRI from the dropdown. SCOS definition is the one we really want because this is a simple vocabulary and you can see what it means. All the other choices as well are available to you, or you can create your own. Next. So when I've gone through that process, and I'm not showing all the details, obviously, in any of these things, neither Brandon or I are doing that, but I will have 2 columns in my table and I can enter the name in the one column and the definition in the other column and create terms for whatever I want them for, using elsewhere or whatever. Next. I can create multiple groups, not just document the moods of the meeting, but also the outcomes of the meeting and in a similar vein, add definitions for all those. Next. So now that I've done all that, I actually have a vocabulary that's worth putting into the system. And so when I click on register this time, I will get successful registration and it will give me the IRI once again. And when I click on OK, I'm back and there's actually a download button that's available from that page. And you can see what the ontology looks like in this situation. And one thing that you can see here is where you see the highlighted happy field. This is the IRI of the ontology. But if I clicked on that, it would actually take me to the ontology itself in COR, and you would see the definition of that term. So this is the nice part about how COR works, is that if you're giving it the terms yourself, it can create the ontology and look up all the terms on the fly from then on. And you don't have to think about building additional software to do that. Next. So if I already had an ontology and I didn't want to build it myself, didn't want to build my own little mini vocabulary like that, most of the process is very similar. The only things I've highlighted here that are different in 3 slides are that I have to decide, is COR going to rehost the ontology and keep all of the IRIs from the ontology exactly the way they are? Or is it going to actually create its own IRIs for resolving the ontology that would let it be looked up through COR? And almost always it's a rehosting situation. That's the case I've selected here. Brandon may demonstrate a case that's different later. I say where the file comes from, it gets chosen, when it is brought in from the outside, then COR already knows what the appropriate name or namespace for this ontology is from the ontology itself. I just have to select that, so that's right. Next slide. And finally, it will tell me what other kinds of metadata it found in that ontology so that I can see that that makes sense and it found everything. Those are the fundamental differences between bringing an ontology into COR and building one yourself from within COR. Next slide. This is where we turn it over to Brandon, who will hopefully, we don't really have a mic, good mic setup. Yes, we do. You go ahead and start talking. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so I was just gonna run through. Anybody following along? Like, it's up to you. I was just gonna run through some of what John showed. So I logged in, so I already have an account, so I logged in, it's my dev account. On the, oh, that was the last one. So if I wanted to create something on the fly, I want to add, let's see, never mind. Hey, we found a bug.
Did it just take that
So-
long for us to get the demo?
Right.
things?
So we're just gonna create a demo structure. I can't type very well. Only the first 2 are needed. As John said, you want to try and fill out as many as you want. Resource type. The nice thing about some of these fields are if you hover over, it'll give you a definition. So kind of a clue as to what is expected in the field if you're not sure. The resource type's kind of murky, which is one of the reasons why it's not included. But we can go through, and especially if I'm the one uploading it, but it was something that was created like from a working group, or I wasn't even an author, whatever. That's why we separated out. Under license and permissions, oh good, none of them are needed. So we have contact information. This is one of the things we've been discussing in different communities. One of the things John didn't talk about was just pause for a minute. One of the things John didn't talk about was like uploading and creating your own and bringing things in from other structures. There's loads of questions around like what's expected, right? What's the etiquette, or what's the proper way to go about doing some of these things, which obviously we're just showing COR as a tool. Those are the things you have to work out with your community members, right? Or the owners of the structure, if there is an owner. The one thing that we do want to add though is license information, like as drop downs. So we have manager, contact again, let's see, rules, author, citation string. If I have a DOI, like in Ruth's example, if she published her ontology and she gets a DOI, then that's where you chuck that. I'm not going to fill any of these in because I'm trying to talk to you and do this. But if you wanted to have a play, go have a look and then see and it might help to see what it looks like, what it gets printed out like in like a turtle file in Manchester. The next part that John was talking about was adding terms. So if we click here, this is where we want to try and figure out if it's something that I'm just playing with, I'm gonna keep a local name, right? So I'm gonna make let's see, test ontology. I don't want a full IRI. This typically means that you have something set up separately. Okay, that would issue, like if you work for a government institution or something, you might have a server that mints IRIs for you that you can use, okay? But I don't have that, so I'm just gonna create my own. Sorry, I'm gonna let COR create one for me, and that's good enough for me. So I'm gonna come through, I wanna create, I just created a class to, sorry, I'm tired. I created a class called test ontology. That's okay. It's like, right? I believe your example is moods, right? For now I'm creating a class. So I'm creating a classes data within the structure. And come on. Right. So let's see, well, I'm tired. Right. Right, you can add whatever you like. And as John was saying, if you want, when you're trying to add, we have a closed set of properties that are added at this stage. So you can create your own, as he was saying, if you want to create a definition for whatever happy is or tired is to you, that's great. But what's really useful is if you know it's something that is used consistently already. John used Scott's definition. DCT descriptions also used quite heavily, right? And it's pretty well understood. So these are just really a sample or a subset of terms that are of predicates that are typically well understood. So if somebody sees them, they kind of know what it is. So if I choose that one, I chose DCT description this time. And I forget which one I clicked on. Was it tired? Yes. Right. So this means that I need a nap. Okay. That's I take that with the description. Right.
Lesson 1, don't build
Don't do it when you're
ontologies when you're tired. True.
Right. But that's okay, because I can change that. Right.
Is there on website?
You're getting a timeout?
Yes.
Is it, it's from the core?
Yeah.
That's core, that's not Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Um,
But I meant to say at the beginning that this is actually our first major scale user test of the system, which is true story. So apologies for that. I'm very pleased that all of you are trying it. And I'm not sure why you're getting timeout. Are you having a problem that might be?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
Well, so I'm just illustrating, creating a second class for outcomes. We'll do pass. Okay. But I can create it. I mean, you can add as many as you like, right? Moods, outcomes, and finished product. Okay. And then adding and typing anything below that you want to add. But when we get to this point, so let's say I've added an outcome, I passed, you have something in fish prep moods. Okay, so now I want to register. You might want to fiddle with your metadata, whatever, but you want to register. This is what John was saying. Once you register the ontology, it's going, well, hopefully, I guess, if we're having some issues, we'll see if it does it.
Might not like that empty value.
Didn't like it when I did that. That either. Back to the slides.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, to
So in general, the
refresh.
nature of the web application is that it is it isn't tested at scale very much. It generally is very, very reliable in terms of not dying or not breaking in unexpected ways. But there are a lot of edges or edge cases around it that are not what you expect. We'll cover one of those a little bit later. And so it hasn't gotten a lot of software support in the last 6 years or so, just keep alive support in the last 6 years or so. And as a result, you are you will find places where it's a little bit frustrating and that's really the significant part of why we're having this discussion today is to say, do we want to go forward with this application? Is it a useful application? And if so, what are the things that are most important to fix first?
All right, so I'll pretend I did all of it. Oh, there we go. Oh, it was my bad. It's because I didn't put in the URI first. So, sorry, I did that really fast because I was trying to figure out why I wouldn't do it. But I didn't fill out the first part of the metadata, so I didn't know what URI to append. So I went in, once I figured that out, then it was fine. But so this is, once you hit register, then that's what this top bar is telling you. So this is what my URI is for the entire thing. If I were to copy this and go to a separate tab, then it should go to my same place. It goes to my ontology. And if any of you are interested, if you wanted to download, you can look at it in whatever format just to see what you've created, see if it's something you recognize. Especially it's sort of, I think it's valuable, especially if you're messing around and if you're not messing around, but if you're experimenting with like creating different properties or something, like different classes, what that actually looks like. So that's back to you.
Back to your slides. Thank you. So let's just stop for a second there and just ask if anybody has any questions they want to ask about either their experience or what we've talked about so far. The tip on the right is unrelated, just about creating ontologies. If you've been looking for a solution to that problem, that's your answer. We're not going to talk about it. No questions? Yes, go ahead. Want a mic?
So if I'm just a lowly repository manager and I don't understand anything about ontologies and so forth, but I know that, I want to make my data fair. And one of the things is that I have to have fair vocabulary. So I want to I don't want to add an ontology. I'm not nearly at that level of sophistication. I want to use an ontology. Are you all going to talk about that?
Next slide.
And I'm clueless.
Well, one of the ways you wear a t-shirt is by promising to wear the t-shirt at least one ESIP session. So, hey, it's not. Yes, so you want to search for ontologies and go ahead and next slide. The basic ways that you're able to do so in COR, there's a certain amount of assumption. So if you're clueless, you have come to this session and you've heard how you do it, and then you go back and look at the slides to make sure, and then you just play around, and then that's roughly how you're figuring it out. Most of the interfaces are simple. We'll talk a little later about searching with Sparkle. So in this case, we're at the front panel and we're starting to enter in the search bar at the top, geo for looking for geospatial ontologies, for example. And it will filter on all the ontologies that you've already seen in the list and pull out the ones that have geo somewhere in their significant metadata. And so next slide. That can be a long list. And if you really just want to get a sense of, okay, who are the different submitters that are providing these ontologies, you can click on the most recent ontology. And now you see the most recent ontology that each of those people submitted. That's especially useful for something like Suite, which has 200 individual ontologies, the way it's made up. So was it Suite or just that this is complicated, Mark, that made you sigh when I was talking about it? Right. Okay. Yes. Yes, it's a good example of an ontology that, and this is another point that I wanted to make later, but we can do it now, which is that we are a little bit at the mercy of the ontologies that are submitted to the system. Some of them are very robust. Some of them are very well curated. Some of them are well curated, but use slightly different models. So the searching doesn't have quite the same things in it. And some of them are not necessarily marked well. iAdopt is one of those that's been recently put into the system and that I haven't had a chance to go back to them and say about how this is created in metadata. Right. So I'm imagining that they don't work because they're iAdopt IRIs and they haven't made them resolvable yet. But that should be doable and it should be something that they do. It's a first principle of, in my mind, it's a first principle when you make an ontology that the IRIs and the ontology should be resolvable. And that's why this system will do that for you if you want it to. We'll let that, for time reasons, we won't chase that down. The audience there was, sorry, the first question, just for people catching up, was in the audience, was that about a basic, are we going to cover basic search, which is what we're doing here. And the second question was about iAdopt being an ontology that the IRIs don't resolve. And so that can be a function of the specific ontology, which I think is the case here, without going and troubleshooting it right now. So next slide. Thank you. Yes. So in this case, we were searching for the ontology, for the metadata, by the metadata of the ontology. But a lot of times you want to say, I want to find an ontology that has this value in it. That's where you click on the term search button in the upper left. It also is, you also will click on the term search button when you want to search on keywords in the ontology, which is a little bit of a UI bug. Sorry. So we're just going to cover the keyword search here first. Next slide. You can see when I type ESIP there that I find the ontology that I created, which is COR 2012 for meaning. I find the suite all ontology, which is the other one I created. And that's because I put ESIP as a keyword in for those two ontologies. No one else has put ESIP in as a keyword for their ontologies, just saying, even though there are a few other ESIP ontologies in it. So you are at the mercy of the providers of the resources, and that is a challenge in this space. And those of you who are new to the space, I'll just apologize for that up front, and we'll move on in this presentation, and let's talk afterwards about things you can do. Next. So now we're going to actually go and search for terms. Go ahead. And keep going. So, and keep going. There we go. Now we're going to search for a term happy. You may remember there was a term happy. Maybe there are two terms happy now. This is just slideware, so we're only going to find mine. And you can see it's a little bit busy, and there are a lot of things that you're not real sure of what they were. We can get a little more specific by typing happy in the subject header. So every line you see here is a triple. Most of you are familiar with ontologies or semantics. Will say triple. Subject, predicate, object. That's what all the statements in an ontology are made up with. Subject, predicate, object. So this is the simple for people who know ontologies user interface that lets you search by subject, by predicate, by object, or by all three. It's filtering. It's not going back and doing a new search repository. It's filtering on what it sees on this page. We can't try them in this case, but when he does the demo, we'll try. And again, yes. Yes, so the concern he's raising is that the links aren't working. And I'm not sure what we'd have to go through individual links. But I'm pretty confident that this link on the subject line is working. But that said, the most that will happen from pursuing this discussion, figuring out what's going on, is I'll say, you're right, that's not right in the repository, or that's not right in the specific ontology. If it's the repository, we'll take a look at it, see if we can fix it. This gives you, when I say, yeah, but that was a lot of information and I want to see just the definition of happy, I can type definition of the predicate because we use the SCOS core definition string. It matches that. We see what the definition is. We're happy. We have the definition. We're enjoying ourselves. Next. You can use that same principle of using the filters when you get within a specific ontology. And so if I want to find Hertz, for example, in the suite science units, I jump down to that particular ontology. I see my same layout. Just a quick look at the next slide. I want to see, okay, go ahead, back up for a sec. We can see various very strange looking units in the table and statements in the table. But we're going to filter down, next slide, next, yeah. By specifying first Hertz in the object column. And then because it's still a little long list, we'll use the same stuff. I just want the labels that say Hertz. And so I put that in the predicate column because I know that particular ontology used label as its property. Other ontologies might use something else for its label. They might have some short label property, and then you'd have to use that potentially. Ruth mentioned earlier this very nice presentation of ontologies. This is where you can get that when you're on an ontology page. If you click on the PyLoad button, you will see a PyLoad representation of most of the ontologies. If you do it for the suite all ontology, all you'll see is a list of the imports because that's how suite is organized. Some of the other ontologies, the PyLoad doesn't work for one reason or another. So from a usability standpoint, having run the Bioportal Observatory also for 8 years, I will just say that usability is often very difficult in this space to make happen well. Next. Are you game? All right, so we'll show you a little more demo. Let me get who has the microphones? Yeah, that's.
So John was just showing, actually, oh, I'm gonna use one of Ruth's examples. So on the left, we have there's all these keys, all these bins, like predefined bins. So you can look for different types. But like what Ruth mentioned, where you might only be interested in, look, I just want what's stable and maybe only from ESIP, right? Or from EarthCube. Let's see, is there anything in there from EarthCube? Oh, there's only one, dope. Let's say ESIP because there's more than one. So you can pre-filter, and then when you're searching, we can start to have a look. All right, let's see. If I were interested in, yeah.
Pressure, is that what it is?
Yours is draft, so I should be able to search for happy and draft, right? Oh, is yours not on there? Mine's on there.
Okay.
So if I do term search, and I don't, one of the things that you might have, no, should I go back on it? One of the things that you might have noticed, when in the slides or if you poke around, while there's ample metadata fields, the actual amount of metadata that's in COR is minimal, right? I think there's 2 mandatory, but even then, like whatever, you can still create something without having the mandatory metadata in there, or there was a time when you could. So searching on keyword search in metadata is often a fool's errand, just a heads up. But to illustrate what John was talking about, we're going, awesome. Oh,
I'll just say
can you see the error?
when I did the demo slide, yeah, I can see everything. When I did the demo slides, I didn't have any of these bugs, just saying.
Oh. We did kill it. So. Sorry. All right, well. We can reboot, I guess.
Yeah, we might, sorry, yeah, coming from the back. Let me get you the mic.
Oh, that we can share. Here you go. This is the GitHub repository for COR. Okay. Anything you want? I think it's on the main page. So when you click in to go into the, oh, sorry,
That's right.
I forgot I was driving. When you click to get into the service, you've already passed that. If you come back, I think if you come
Yes.
back here, so the project homepage, and then you can go to GitHub. So you can get there. But that's a good point.
You
That
also
would be
get
nice
there if
have
you
that
go
up
to,
here.
I believe you'll get there if you go to help. And you might as well show help while you're here because save some slides later. So the help is fairly complete. It's as complete as this demo is. And then the ORR documentation tracker is the main one that you would be putting tickets into. And also where you can do pull requests on this documentation. You're always welcome to contact myself directly if you want.
Okay, so we just showed them two though.
Yeah, that's fine. We can go back to the slides.
All right.
So there, yeah, there is. I think I've seen core, core hasn't gotten a ton of use. It's, you know, it's used every so often. But it is not heavily used the way it is today. I haven't seen it go down more than twice in 2 or 3 years. So it's very reliable in general, but it hasn't been tested with the edge conditions well at all. So that might be one of the things we agree to bring forward. So the last thing we want to talk about a little bit is just searching with Sparkle, and we won't kill this because it's intermediate to advanced. But this is how I learn a lot of my Sparkle. On the main page, Ontology page, there's a Sparkle search that's highlighted there. And when you click on it, you end up at a box. Sorry, I'll show you in a minute. But you see when you click on it, you see that. Go back.
Yeah.
Need my notes.
All right.
Yeah, go back.
There we go. Back here.
Thank you there. Forward. It's like the comic routine, forward, back. So we're now going into another interface. It's provided as part of the Sparkle service, but YasGUI has actually written all this software. And it lets you fine tune queries and it gives you lots of control. But when you start to query ontologies with Sparkle, you have to know how those ontologies are modeled. If you're going in blind to an ontology, that's an advanced type of querying technique. So just be prepared for that. Next slide. So you end up at this when you click on the Sparkle interface, and you see an example of the Sparkle down there in the query box. And if we click the execute this query button is the right arrow on the right side, and when you press that button, you get 10 triples from somewhere in the repository. You don't know where, it doesn't know where, it's not controlled. It's just an example. But that's why we say limit 10. If you didn't say that, you'd get 6 million examples from the whole repository. That would definitely make them happy. But you can now edit what's in this box to change the query. What kinds of queries would I put in, you might ask? In the examples link that we sort of clicked before we left, you arrive at this page. And this is a number of examples that were created specifically for the MMI repository before this one. And so while these examples will work when you click on the execute button, be aware you're not actually querying core anymore. You're querying the MMI repository from this page, this examples page. It's set up to query the other repository. I think the next slide is the result of this particular query. Let's just see if that's, no, we went back. Okay. So we've come back now to the core ontology repository. There are other interesting features that are in this page that you can play around with on your own. There's a curl button that lets you see the entire curl expression, the single line command of what your query is. There's a sandwich menu on the left, a hamburger menu on the left that has a number of other interesting options for looking at other formats of the query. And in some cases, you can get interesting alternative formats for the response of your query. If you were querying, for example, information with geodata in it, with geospatial data in it, then a geo might give you a map or something else more geospatial representing the data. Next slide. So here I did a search on happy and it really did work. Go ahead. Oh, when you click on the Sparkle button there, you can actually see what the search for the term looks like in Sparkle. You could copy this back into your Yazoo box and test it out. And it gives you almost exactly the same answer. So these are the kinds of complexities you start to work with that this gives you access to, so that you can start making queries across the whole repository, and or to specific ontologies in the repository. There's also a REST API documented in the help text, didn't cover that. You could just play with the scripting to go through those processes. Next slide.
No.
We're not going to see this in action. COR does have a term mapping tool, which is quite old and has some nice interface ideas, but the science and technology and standards of term mapping have evolved quite a bit since then. So consider this more a little bit of a prototype UI for now, and we'll come back later to see if we should add to that, add more features to that. So the user guide is what you get to when you click on help, and that's the OR doc link you see there. The contact us leads to an ESIP form, goes to the ESIP. They'll forward it to us as appropriate. That's another good way. If the system's down, send it to the contact us. That's probably the best thing to do, because there is both someone at ESIP who understands how to reboot the system as well as ourselves. Probably it'll have to come to us, but they might do it. The GitHub links, there are two. The MMISW one is all of the software infrastructure and so forth. That's also available through ESIP Fed. But the /core project is sort of our ESIP Fed instantiation of that. So the MMISW is where we report all the tickets. And there's a Slack on the ESIP Slack. There's a core channel that you can sign up to. There's about 30 or 40 people on it. So it's not very active, but if you're interested in asking questions or having conversations or seeing how you can help, that's the place to go. Next slide. Okay. That's when I start really looking at you all a lot more closely, and we actually can start filling out the Slido. And so I'd like people, if you are willing, to go to slido.com and enter in COR, COR, and indicate the first question is about what brings you to the COR training. And so if you can just take a minute and respond to that one. I'll actually give it a few minutes going with slides, and then I'm going to do the second presentation. We'll go to the next slide. And the next slide. So we mentioned that ESIP's the baby. ESIP's got the baby. COR was put here for you all members of ESIP, really the whole Earth Science community. So this is the key part where we figure out where we're going to go with this next. Keep going. Good. Yep. We'll need you to use it and promote it and complain about it. We'll also need organizational committee from ESIP to support it, both in terms of occasionally time and resources, but also from the ESIP funders who provide resources to the ESIP community for specific things they do. So while ESIP as a whole is deciding whether COR is important, you are really primary to that process. And ESIP in a way needs to hear from you, but also, and I didn't write this down, the different funders of ESIP need to be NASA, USGS, NOAA, whoever I'm leaving out, NSF. To the extent these organizations have agreements with ESIP, it's up to them to say whether supporting COR is something they want to see. If they don't say they want it, it's not going to be supported. And so let's see what the next slide says. Problem a little. That would be the same slide all over again. What do you think? I see the problem there. So that's what we're asking is, what do you think? In a few minutes, I'm going to put up a slightly complicated slide question, which will require you to prioritize what the major things you think are we should spend on for. We're going to talk for the next 25 minutes, about these things and get a little, criticizing and constructive feedback, in order to help advise that decision. But these are the kinds of examples I put on there. I don't think there's a way to actually select that, or I don't think there's a way to select others. Sorry about that. So I haven't quite picked that one off yet, but I will. In 2 more minutes. First, I'm going to pick off a second query about what is your semantic experience level. And thank you for the 20 votes on the first query. I appreciate that. I'll at least walk you through these and post them later so you can see what's in them. So you can see that these are somewhat over the map. These are all almost all technically, there are 3 things that support the things that this support commitment from your own organizations. Mirroring the ontologies, we really had all of our ontologies also. Some other repositories, that's other countries. Bioportal is an example of that. This is the bigger portal and repository coming out. Right now, you can only get HTTP support in COR because we just haven't set up the ESIP infrastructure to support HTTP messages. Permission. So those are the kinds of things we'll be asking you to prioritize. Let's go ahead to the next slide. See how many votes I have on the second one. 60 votes is very good. Okay, give you 10 more seconds to tell me your semantic experience level. I will tell you that 59% of you are level 2. No one is level, is number 2, which is beginning intermediate. No one is saying they're advanced. Nobody here is advanced, really? Okay, I think some of you are. 30% are no experience at all. And I possibly should have done this down a little bit, but I really wanted to try and bring everybody up one as well. So that's good. All right. We're going to start the third one now. You'll see one of the entries in this third query says above the line needed. And that's basically the divider between things we absolutely have to do. If we're going to do for it all, you say you have to have this. If you're not going to, but if you're not going, they can, if you're not going to allow fully hard ontologies, then everybody use for it. I don't think it's matter. Get that above it. Okay. If you have something that you want, but it's not that critical, all those can be prioritized above below the line. So it's a little dragging exercise. It's going to be open for the next 20 minutes, so you don't have to go drag everything now. You can play around a little bit and see how it goes. So yeah, let's go ahead now to the next slide.
Stay by the mic. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And I apologize to all of you who are remote who are seeing me dance here. It's just too exciting. So we've been through this process a little bit before. There was a sweet ESIP survey in 2021 on semantic usage that Brandon and others had experience with. And there were a lot of people who are using a lot of semantic assets in a lot of different ways for different use cases and a lot of different semantic tools. Or perhaps not surprisingly, was the second highest of all those tools. But even then, for 4 people, not 40. A lot of different advanced audiences there. Next slide. And this came from another meeting. I'll actually get Ruth to go ahead and talk to this slide, and she's going to also after that provoke our discussion a little bit and get some feedback, help us get some feedback from you all about different things. So Ruth, can you talk to us about this slide?
Sure. Back in January of 2023, the semantic harmonization cluster had a session on roadblocks and successes in adopting semantic technologies. And as part of that session, we had a number of questions we asked the audiences about the semantic challenges. And we got a lot of response. And we spent some time in the cluster after that categorizing what kind of roadblocks there were. Some of it was educational, some of it was cultural, and then the semantic community itself has some fundamental issues of also being somewhat stovepiped, or I'm not quite sure what you could say about that, but anyway, and it turned out that one of the big things the audiences wanted was more training, and the cluster thought about that for a while and came to the conclusion that we didn't have enough manpower, or people power, I should say, to really do a good job at that. Though I think we'd have to count this core training here as sort of one attempt at one part of that kind of training. And so that's what this was all about, was to try and understand what the community needs were, where the roadblocks were, and what ESIP could do about them. And that's pretty much where we are today. And I think you could probably go on to the next slide. And please don't step through these until I ask you to. Thank you. So yeah, you can hit return once here. I need to start off by giving you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from on all of this. And so next, thank you. Whoa, stop. Oh, thank you. Okay, so the thing you have to realize is I don't just do one discipline. I mean, I've worked in and published on star formation, quasars, particle acceleration, and relativistic motion. I've done some NLP work. I've done some ML work. I've done satellite operations, operational systems development, data citation, care principles, semantic harmonization, user needs, and all sorts of other things. So having stovepipes that are disciplinary don't work for me. And in general, a lot of the stuff I want to do and the things I need to do that, they're generally not available. I mean, I really don't like reinventing the wheel, which sometimes seems like all I've ever done. And I don't like it when people do work and their outputs aren't available in a usable form, even if that's a vocabulary. For example, a few years ago, Brandon created a website with all the earth science ontologies that he could find in the literature. And I love that site. And I wish it still existed. But almost all of the many dozens of ontologies that he found and put on that website were unavailable, or at best, only available via paper, in usually the paper that published that ontology. In other words, totally not useful. I hate it even more, next arrow, that as a data manager who strongly believes that the outputs of science needs to be available for others to build upon, that my own data outputs have largely disappeared, despite my very best efforts to provide them good permanent homes. For example, my very first set of ontologies about sea ice were created using the best practices of the day, which were Google Code and Perls for the IRIs. Well, a few years after that project ended, Google killed Google Code, and the library community stopped, IMSL that is, stopped funding Perl. And so, yeah, a few years later, that was picked up by the Internet Archive folks. But basically, my ontologies died, not because of anything I did, but because the technologies changed, and there wasn't any, there wasn't any way to revive them really, other than I was very thankful that Kai Bloomberg and Pierluigi Buttigieg decided that the sea ice terms were important enough. And so they picked up a lot of that work and added it to Envo. So yeah, so it's a problem. Next, click, thank you, even one more. And it's been mentioned already today, but you know, the FAIR principles actually require that your data and metadata, all those fields, if they don't have an ontology with definitions and all of that underneath them, I'm sorry, they are not FAIR. I was one of the people who helped create the FAIR standard, and I know for a fact that you need to have an ontology underpinning all of your fields if you ever hope to really truly be interoperable. So next. Thank you. And so here's the things that I want. I want ESIP to endorse COR or something similar to COR as a foundation of a semantic repository for the Earth, environmental and space sciences. I mean, there is no business case for a commercial solution to having a repository with search capabilities for semantic resources in science. There just isn't really one. And COR is basically what we've got. So we need to keep it going. Okay, next. So what do I want to make that happen? If it doesn't have some fundamental level of support, infrastructure support, you know, it is going to die, and I'm going to lose yet. Okay, so I only at the moment have 17 ontologies in COR. Hopefully to be 18 here with a project I'm working on currently in a few weeks. So what I want is it to be supported, to be a line item in all the cooperative agreements that ESIP has with anybody, which right at the moment is NASA, NOAA, and USGS. Because I really don't like the fact that NASA does its own thing, NOAA does its own thing, and the USGS does its own thing. And if you're trying to use all the data from all of those places and they've all done their own thing, that's, you know, makes it really hard. Next. And I do want things to go just beyond Earth and space. I do think we need to connect to the biomedical world, which I've been working. I mean, for a while there, I was trying to get the Obo Foundry to take the word bio out of their name, but they don't want to because they can do their own thing, but they don't think they can accommodate other communities that aren't willing to chip in. So I want COR to exist so that we have a place to put all of our vocabulary ontology type work that lives and is useful. And I want it to be connected to the rest of the semantic world so that we can make, you know, queries across all of that and start making data fair for all disciplines, basically. All right, so that was a rant. I'm sorry. We can go on into something else, please.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Ruth. Is this on? There's also a question in the chat.
Yep.
That we're transitioning after this, right? So Kate's asking, she's restating something she put in earlier as a question. What's the difference between MMI and COR?
Right.
Which one should be used for which types of resources?
Right.
And which should ESIP support?
Right. Great. Excellent questions all. Thank you for those questions, Kate. So MMI created the original code base for the MMI ontology registry and repository. It's been used on several different repositories, including COR. So there are two deployments, if you like, of that code base, one of which is the MMI ORR, the other one is COR. There's a third called XDomes that I think might still be active, but is not active. So when COR was created, some of these side elements of it didn't get carried over from the MMI repository. The help, the documentation, all is still written for the software in general, not with core specifically in mind. So that's just one manual for all systems at the moment, is the way it's set up. You saw how the examples point back to the original system. There is a little bit of overlap of ontologies between the two. MMI was much more used in the first 10 years because core didn't exist, and is somewhat less used now for new ontologies than core is. So I would say, because core has more active maintenance and attention and gets a meeting about it, and MMI is just my time and my money, and I don't get to talk about it at conferences. Put your new things in core. And we are actively considering, we've been considering for a long time, but it's become more present, to move the ontologies out of the MMI OR repository into core, forward all the IRIs so they don't die, and manage them henceforth in core, which of course depends that core does get support. Did I answer all the questions, Brendan?
Yeah, I think so. I was just going to add that it's a little bit like in the bioportal world. There's
Yes.
bioportal, ecoportal, agriportal, whatever.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to pick, but they're all the same underlying architecture.
Right.
It's more for audience. In saying that, I'm pretty sure they all funnel into bioportal at some stage. But that's
Yes, I could tell you all sorts of stories about that.
but
no,
the point is that you can put them wherever you want. As
Right.
John said, MMI is sort of in its twilight. So
I think that's true. Noah could come back tomorrow and say, we really need a dedicated repository just for Noah. And we think core MMI OR could be it. And I'd say, okay, let's make it happen. That would be fine. But broadly speaking, I think core is the better landing place at this point. Thank you. Are there let's start with questions. There are a few more slides, I think. Let's see what the next slide is, Brandon, just fix. Right, so we talked about these are the things that will be done. Or that could be done, I should say, categories of things. This is a longer list of things than you had to choose from, like community engagement didn't show up in the other list. Federation of content, trust and care, those didn't show up. Those felt to me like further away, more aggressive, so that's why they didn't show up. We have quite a few responses so far. It looks like you all mastered the technology. This is wonderful. Let's go ahead to the next slide and we'll get close to closure. Yeah, unfortunately, only on my computer will that update with the current view, but that's okay. I mentioned, ways to earn your t-shirts. We can negotiate. If you have another way you'd like to contribute besides the 6 ways over there, that's fine. I'll be over there with t-shirts. So as soon as Susan's pointed out, I think the ESIP leadership actually understands at this point. I talked to her at the beginning of this meeting, but didn't get to update this slide. The ESIP leadership understands the value here, but they don't feel like they have a mechanism where they can spend the money they're receiving from the respective agencies on this activity. It's a little different than everything else ESIP does. And so I respect that difference, as annoying as it may be. They can, if somebody here says, I'd like to do this thing for core or with core, they could write a Funding Friday or an ESIP lab proposal. And if that gets approved in each of those mechanisms, you'd have $7,500. Most of us, that's more of a hindrance than a help. So I'm not expecting any of y'all to do that. Just saying it's a 3-month. There you go. Next slide. These are the different ways generally that you would benefit core. We really need to have the conversation we're starting to have right at this moment. And so why don't you go ahead to the next slide? And I think it's going to be, I just want to mention there are more sessions about semantics, especially the Blue Ridge. No, where's yours, Brandon? Yeah, it's the Blue Ridge. Nope. Yeah, Thursday at 4. Is that yours?
Last Friday.
Friday. Yes, Friday at 9. All of these are highly relevant. a lot of discussion about agencies and how they're going to become, how they're going to become more collected at ESIP or through ESIP, could happen semantics wise if you try to. So I'll go ahead and hit the last slide and then we're going to have a conversation. A lot of thanks are due to a lot of people. If I made the list of all the people who've contributed to CORE, it would fill this slide top to bottom, a couple columns. So I definitely owe thanks to all of them to let us be here now with MMI and CORE. Carlos Shurita, Luis Bermudez at the very beginning, and Luis McGivney. Thank you. Have all contributed a whole lot. Beth has, Huffer has as well, in her time as the SimTech chair. So very good. Okay, that's the end of the slides. Stand in front of the microphone. All right. Yes, just that's the end of the slides. I would like to get feedback of all types about the things you've heard today. Some of you have inferred that CORE was partly my baby back in the day, but despite the shirts, I'm willing to let go of this baby. I'm at a point where I could do it more, or I could do it less. But I don't want it to be in this never land of it's not really funded, but we're keeping it going anyway. So I'd like to hear all sorts of comments about any of. Oh, look, cool. Does that mean it's running again? Okay. Yeah, about any of the different categories of things, about the things you're ranking, about what others should include. Comments, please. Yes. And mention your name if you would, and a couple words of background. Thank you. You can take the back and I'll take the front.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matthew Biddle. I'm with the IU's program office. Yeah, John, we've had a lot of chats about this and
Didn't know who you were. It's like, oh, you're not too bad. 10 years ago, I probably knew who you were.
so we have we actually have I guess an ontology within the XDomes project that IU's uses or that we built. We actually have gone back, and since then we've decided to deprecate a lot of our terms and a lot of our mappings, because what ended up happening, the technology is great. We don't have the resources to manage that and to provide the authoritative source for this is what this term means, this is what it maps to. And since vocabularies have evolved a lot since I think it was like 2010 when these terms were added in there, there's been a lot of changes. And so part of our guidance has been go to the authoritative source, whether it's CF, whether it's GCMD or something else, so that that's no longer a thing we have to manage on our end. Because while the technology was great, it was the management of those terms and making sure that the mappings are still up to date with whatever's happening. And we decided that wasn't a world we wanted to get into. We don't want to get into vocabularies. And so my question is, to keep CORE going, I feel like there needs to be a guidance on how to manage authoritative vocabularies. And really, I don't know if that's the place for CORE. Like, our opinion has been let other people deal with that, and we'll point to those other people to go use those resources. But we do have, I think there's 2 vocabularies that we didn't deprecate out of the 15 or 18 that we had in there. We did keep 2. So that means there is a space for it. And I think that space is almost like we're piloting some new vocabulary before it gets added to GCMD or to CF. And here's a place that you can go look at it. And then once that gets merged in, then it can be flipped over to whatever that is. So those are just some comments that I have.
Before you give up your microphone, can I just ask a bit of a probing question? When you say we, is it safe to assume that means NOAA as a whole, or a certain part of NOAA? How big a part of NOAA? A very little tiny, or
I wouldn't speak for on behalf of all of NOAA, but at least part of IU's, which is an office within NOAA. And we work with 11 regional associations, which are affiliated with universities and nonprofits and things like that. So we have a spider web of connections. So
my other question is a little more pointed, and I won't pick on all of you this way, but we're you see, I think you won't be offended. and this is all really valuable input. Thank you for these comments. From when I was involved back in the day with all of those entities, I know that there are a lot of vocabularies in use. And is it fair to say that, in fact, to the extent they are using all of these terms, they really are coming from the standard locations and people aren't going rogue and creating their own terminologies and it just doesn't surface to the top level?
As best as we can force folks to adhere to the standards, yeah.
Fair. Yeah.
Right. So they can do GCMD, but they might not use the exact right terms or things like that. And they might go rogue and do their own thing, but we try our best to make sure that they align with standards by providing compliance and things like that.
Okay, so your part of it is a very low vocabulary, vocabulary management. It's a lot of use, but not so much management because other parts of the world are creating the necessary underwater atmospheric vocabularies that you need.
Right.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
And one other thing I would say is if there's a way to get usage statistics out of COR,
Yes.
who are using the terms and where are they being used? That
Yeah,
would be-
down to the term level and so on. Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
So I
Thank you.
didn't see that on the like, what should we invest in if we do get money?
Super. No, that's a really good point.
John Ralph from NOAA's NCEI. You mentioned that it would probably be better to create a vocabulary using a vocabulary creation tool rather than
Yeah.
creating it right in COR. What would that be?
Right. So how good a model do you want your vocabulary to be? Is it a bag of terms? Is it a thesaurus with definitions? Or is it, to give you 3 examples, or is it an actual model of an ecosystem or of something in the real world that you want to be really accurate and well managed?
Or are you asking, do I want predicates in between the terms so we can understand relationships between terms and there may be a hierarchy or at least.
That's roughly where this is going.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Well, I would say that there is probably a need for that level of ontology.
So I had the little side tip up here, and I'll just go back to that because I've never, there is a place for strong models using ontologies to make strong models. The medical infrastructure does that a lot. You can do amazing things when you really put a lot of energy, but it's a lot of energy. Some of ours like Envo are strong models to an extent, if I'm not mistaken. But that pipeline that I had in the tip, Excel to RDF, came because the kind of vocabulary I wanted to make most often is the kind where I had 10 different lists of terms that were each hierarchical, that all had to do with this application and how it does searches on annotations or in drop-down menus or whatever. So it was really pretty structured, but and detailed and thoughtful. But I did not want to be writing ontological OWL code in order to do that. And so that tool, that pipeline, SCOSplay in particular, is a lovely way to manage it in Excel, but get all the benefits out of SCOS, nice SCOS ontology capabilities. And you can even make OWL ontologies with it, but that's going a little too far probably. If you get to the point where, for whatever reason, that kind of model, maintaining it isn't your thing, then you go to some other tool. Protege is the one I'm most familiar with. I have never been able to figure out how to use it despite multiple attempts. There are others, TopRate, others that are each have value in their way. Some people can do it with Protege. It's really valuable. Yobo Foundry has a rich tool ecosystem that is very valuable for working with ontologies, not necessarily strictly just with making them, but also analyzing them and so forth. And that's another place I would point people to look at. And I'm sorry to say I don't have a good example of a tool that's beautiful. But ontologies are complex, and I believe you were mentioning the commercial, where's the commercial interest in creating thank you for that question. Yeah. Before you go, say one word about any impression you're leaving with because you've made other comments that have really been valuable.
Sure, yeah, I think it's valuable, absolutely.
Really? Okay.
I think what people really need is what he was asking about, is how to build ontologies and how to understand
Yeah.
how to make use of those in our various
Yeah.
research projects.
Yeah.
But once that happens, we're all gonna be looking for something like this. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Then you have to put them somewhere, right? Yeah. Yeah. So the community capacity there to help people make that happen is what I'm hearing from both of you. Thank
you
you.
guys are ahead of the curve.
We have a place if that's what, yes, thank you. You should have seen us 15 years. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Hope to catch you later in the week. Yeah, other comments, please, in either direction. I know a lot of you are relatively new to this, so you're not going to come in and say, oh, look, we're almost done. Okay, you're not going to come in and say, this is what you should do, but I'm still happy to hear from the newbie perspective. Yeah, Mark. This will be last one, unless somebody else jumps up. I'll tell you one more thing and we're done.
First, to your question, John, it's not exactly what you're looking for, but it's super useful. It's a tool called CMAP.
Oh, yeah.
Just Google CMAP concept maps. And in the old version, I learned about this from Peter Fox. The old version would export straight to RDF. I'm not sure the current version does, but it's a very easy tool to lay out the concepts and the mapping of the, subject, predicate, object. Back to the supporting core thing. Core's cool, or has coolness potential. ESIP's not a funding agency. ESIP, I don't know, it's not really an infrastructure organization. I can see that this is a challenge for ESIP. And so it's too bad that the Obo Foundry, wants to focus on the biomedical because they're well stored. But I guess my question is, have you looked at the business model for things like ENVO and the Obo Foundry that are these, ongoing supported ontologies and repositories that we could learn from?
Yes and no. I've been somewhat aware of the Obo business model, usually through hearing from, his name escapes me, that they never have any funding. But I do see people doing work that's funded, so I think they do have bits and pieces. But I worked at BioPortal for 8 years under Mark Musin, and so I have intimate knowledge of the BioPortal and Ontoportal business models. I'll just say if it's here that I have a ability, I may have an ability to write some proposals that might be a fit for certain open solicitations. And that's a part of where this could go also, or maybe starting a nonprofit that has the ability to consolidate. We could talk about all that offline.
So, but the bottom line is they're grant funded. They don't have a nice,
Largely,
they don't have a
yes.
nice benefit.
But they're grant funded because they have been grant funded. I don't think it's impossible to think of a scenario where it is user funded in a more voluntary way than everybody has to pay $100.
Or a
Yeah.
ongoing benefactor. I mean, the glory of GCMD is that NASA has supported it for 30 years.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, there's a comment behind you that may be to this point.
Yes, maybe a compliment to where Mark was coming from on what ESIP's not, thinking about what ESIP is and what we could potentially contribute to something like this. Maybe pivoting back towards doing more kind of community upskilling and holding more workshops and building more of a user base for this type of community and more capacity within the people of ESIP to do this. So.
Yeah, I thought we could call it multidisciplinary metadata interoperability project and reuse all our old. You have the kits. I mean, you can reuse the kits. All right, we need to bring it to a close. I'll give Brandon and Ruth a chance just to get their last words in. And anyone who wants to stick around a little bit into this is what I'll be talking about in the reception anyway. So I'll stick around or walk with you. Brandon, go ahead.
I just want to say, so Ruth has mentioned robot as a tool in the chat, which if you haven't checked it out, you should consider it. There's also the, it's ODK, Ontology Development Kit.
Yes.
Which has a bunch of, it's linked into BioPortal, but don't let that dissuade you, you can use it for anything, but it has a tool chaining kit where you can go from nothing to building an ontology in well, I won't say short order, you still have to figure it out, but it helps you along the way. Okay, there are pieces that help you along the way. And the other bit that I wanted to address the last couple of points, I think part of there's a tech component, right? But I think there's a not insignificant component that is like figuring out if you want to query any of these, you still have to know what the data model is, right? If you're using SCOS predicates and you query for OWL predicates, you won't get the results. So if we can have a think about as a community, and this is again where ESIP might be able to play a role, if we can as a community think about the modeling patterns we want to implement, right? So that no matter which domain we're in, we have some idea of what the results are going to be if we submit a query to whatever service, whether it's COR or something else, right? Or DCMD or whatever other vocabularies might exist. I think there might be some real value there in identifying what those patterns might be, and then and sort of curating that community. There's some other things along those lines, but I can appreciate where you're coming about who does what and where. And in terms of I just also the business model.
We're out of time, just so you know.
All right, I'll scratch that. We have plenty other sessions. Sorry to keep you.
Reception. Stay for the reception to hear about.
Thanks,
the business
everybody.
model. Ruth, did you have any last word you wanted to add?
Not really, other than I still don't believe there is an actual business model other than
There.
other than the factor that science needs this if it's actually going to do any of that solving the big problems that we're trying to solve. In other words, it is part of the mission and vision of ESIP that
So-
COR is supporting, and that without it, ESIP's not going to fulfill its mission and vision, and that's just the way it is.
So
And it's
there-
not my problem anymore. It's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Ruth and Brendan, for getting this set up. I really enjoyed being able to do it. And thank you all for staying till the end.